In 1989, moments before the first pitch in the third game of the World Series. In September of 2001. And of course, Patriots Day 2013 in Boston. From time to time, real life interrupts baseball. But as it did in San Francisco, New York, and Boston, baseball returns to what it had been before and helps the healing process. But for the Cuban Sugar Kings, real life and history proved too much to overcome.
Sports, militarism, and nationalism coalesced in a moment of political frenzy when Cubans thought that utopia was at hand.
Overthrown, the story of the Cuban Sugar Kings. For Americans, Cuban baseball is the story of irrepressible spirits, such as Yasiel Puig and Jose Abreu, men who bested a dictator against all odds to follow their dreams. In truth, Cuba has had an untamable passion for the game that predates Puig, Abreu, and Castro to the very beginning of the nation.
Cuba was very much in touch with the United States. Cuba sold most of its exports to the United States. Baseball became associated with something modern, the United States, something democratic, something that was the opposite of Spain and its backward sport, which was bullfighting. It became part of the ideology of independence. And by the time the Second Independence War began in 1895, there were hundreds of teams.
Baseball was so integrated into the separatist mindset that men like Emilio Saborin, who organized, played, and managed in the first professional league in Cuba, funneled profits from the league to the poet Jose Marti, known as the Apostle of Cuban Independence. For his activism, Saborin found himself incarcerated in a Spanish prison, where he died in 1897. 44 years later, he was inducted into Cuba's Baseball Hall of Fame.
Baseball was present at the very birth of the Cuban nation. It is as if the founding fathers of the United States had been swinging Louisville sluggers.
From the early 20th century, the two countries were partners in the evolution of baseball.
It's not just the influence of American baseball on Cuba, but also the influence of Cuba on American baseball and society.
Since not much money was made in Major League Ball, when the Major League season was finished, players were sent to the clubs of Cuba, which was where the best professional ball was played in winter.
When the Winter League finished up, full rosters of American teams hit Cuba's playing fields, looking for competition before opening day, and sometimes finding something even more.
American teams, all white, would come to Cuba and play Cuban teams that had blacks and whites and mulattoes and everything, and sometimes they lost. I think it was John McGraw who famously said, "We didn't come down here to Cuba to be beaten by a bunch of coffee-colored Cubans."
All those great American players who played here, because you couldn't make that much money, in winter, you could play baseball. Ted Williams, Babe Ruth, all the great players went to play in Cuba.
In November of 1910, American League batting champ Ty Cobb took the boat over from Key West and played in 5 games against an Almendarez side with John Henry Lloyd, Home Run Johnson, and Bruce Petway. The Tigers came away with a winning record, and Cobb did hit .370 in 5 games. But Lloyd hit .500, and Johnson .412. Petway, who hit .390, also threw out Cobb, attempting to steal second.
But some of the major stars of the Negro Leagues had a tremendous following in Cuba.
Cuba quickly went from being a winter haven and showcase venue to a great source of players for organized American baseball. In the 1930s, a cigar-smoking former minor leaguer from Lowell, Massachusetts began roaming the ball fields of Cuba in his trademark linen suits, identifying talented Cuban players and signing them to contracts with American teams. Papa Joe Cambria was once referred to as the Christopher Columbus of baseball for taking the island's treasures. Cambria signed over 400 players and opened a door that would become a floodgate through which Latin players entered the major leagues.
From the 30s onward, Cuba provided many baseball players to the organizations of the major leagues.
Baseball is not only absorbed from the United States, but an influence goes back to the United States from Cuba.
By the 1950s, the cross-pollination of American and Cuban ball players was fully evolved. But the hearts of the Cuban fans belonged to the teams of Cuba.
For us, that was the main attraction, the four teams, Almendares, Havana, Marianao, and Cienfuegos.
Rivalry, the Winter League provided Cubans with an escape from the tumult of a political arena that saw 18 men ascend to lead the country in its first 50 years.
Look, when professional baseball started in Cuba in the month of October, people forgot about politics. It doesn't matter if it was Prio, Grau, or Batista, that there was a revolution. It didn't interest us. The season started, and everyone forgot about everything, and we started to enjoy baseball.
Cuban Winter League games were held in Stadium Cerveza Tropical, a combination multi-purpose stadium and beer garden in suburban Marianao that had also hosted the Pan American Games.
The facility was a big stadium, very beautiful, with a lot of tradition. But it also had a track and field area, the running track. So it was necessary to put up portable fences to play professional baseball because that stadium was huge. From home to right field, it was 350 feet. To center field, it was over 400 feet. From home to left field, it was over 500 feet. And after that was a hill, and on top of the hill was the clubhouse. So when you got changed for a game, you had to walk a kilometer. And when you finished playing, you had to walk another one to take a shower.
But Tropical was showing its age by the end of World War II. And when ownership balked at making renovations or building a new stadium, a group headed by Bobby Maduro, the son of a sugar and insurance magnate, stepped in and built a gem of a stadium in the Havana neighborhood of El Cerro.
Bobby Maduro was one of the impresarios that built the stadium in Havana for the 1946 winter season.
At the new Cerro Stadium, crowds up to 36,000 fans gathered to cheer Havana and Almendares teams, as well as many amateur players.
Bobby emerged as the owner, but he needed a big company backing him, and the Bacardi Company appeared as the sponsor. And you can see it in pictures, the billboards in El Estadio del Cerro. What was there a lot was the big name of the Bacardi Company.
It was ahead of its time, seated about 35,000 people, but it had a stadium club, which was a great place before you went to the game. You could go, have lunch, see friends, and then walk in and watch the game. Also, it had tremendous public transportation. You could get to it from anywhere by bus. I still remember, when I used to skip school and go and take bus number 20 right to the door of the stadium.
El Estadio del Cerro was home for all fans. The crowd reminded us of something similar to the Dodgers when they were in Brooklyn. It was something where everyone really felt at home in El Estadio del Cerro.
The stadium at El Cerro was home to the Cuban Winter League and a Class D minor league team owned by Joe Cambria. But Maduro had bigger plans for his showpiece and for baseball in Cuba.
By the 50s, the Cuban economy was booming, really booming. Maduro sees the chance of having Cuba join organized baseball, so he managed to purchase the Springfield team, which was in dire straits in the International League, and move it to Havana.
That was a great news. I remember when they first came out, because my father used to follow the baseball and radio and TV. And for us, it was one of the biggest news at that time, yes, for baseball.
To have a franchise was a dream. It was big. There's nothing more important than that in the realm of baseball, really.
The Sugar Kings were created as a AAA farm team of the Cincinnati Reds. And Cincinnati had a large following in Cuba because Adolfo Luque had pitched for Cincinnati, and it was called El Querido Cincy, the beloved Cincy.
Ironically, at the beginning of the relationship, it was the Reds who were caught in the Cold War crossfire.
Mr. McCarthy, I will not discuss this further with you.
The McCarthy hearings and talk of blacklists had Americans so sensitized to even the hint of communism in their midst that the Cincinnati Reds felt compelled to change their name to the Red Stockings in 1953 and the Red Legs in 1955. When they reverted back to Reds in 1959, GM Gabe Paul made it clear that they played baseball, not politics.
I am very happy to have this circus ended so that we can get back to the work of digging out communism, corruption, treason in government.
Regardless of what the parent team was called, the affiliation meant one thing to Maduro and the rest of Cuba.
They used to say, un paso más y llegamos.
Un paso más
Un paso más
y llegamos.
y llegamos.
Un paso más y llegamos.
Un paso más y llegamos. That means one more step and we're there. And everybody think we're going to have a big league team.
It was not a crazy idea at all. Havana was a very metropolitan, international city, very sophisticated. Why not? So that was the dream of Bobby Maduro.
Todo lo que se necesitaba para jugar.
Everything that was necessary for a professional baseball team to play at the major league level, Havana could provide at that time. First, we had the housing capacity, entertainment, and all the facilities required to have a major league club. The city of Havana at that time could offer better things than Pittsburgh, better things than Houston.
It was big, and I think if we have a team over there, they're going to have a lot of good players, and a lot of players want to play there.
But the birth of the Sugar Kings came at an especially volatile time in Cuba.
Cuba once again experiences a revolution. The regime of President Carlos Prios Acaras is ended by a combined group of younger elements of the Army, Navy, and Police, headed by former President Fulgencio Batista.
In 1952, Fulgencio Batista returned to Cuba and orchestrated a coup. His would be an especially brutal and heavy-handed dictatorship that stirred unrest from the very beginning, sometimes even disrupting the national pastime. On July 26, 1953, just months before Maduro obtained the rights to the franchise, the military squashed a rebel attack of the Moncada barracks in Santiago, which resulted in the arrest and imprisonment of a 26-year-old law student by the name of Fidel Castro.
There was an anti-Batista feeling because he was a dictator. But this whole Castro thing was in Sierra Maestra, 1,000 miles east of Havana.
In central and western Cuba in the early 50s, we were not aware of what was going on in eastern Cuba. Life seemed normal, even in Havana. I went to school, I went to parties, I went to baseball games.
You would hear rumbles, as you say, and this and that and the other, but no one really took it seriously because nobody knew what was going on.
Fidel Castro ran to the hills, he was captured, found asleep by some military men who could have changed Cuban history right there. And he was brought to trial, sent to jail in the Isle of Pines, where he spent some time, mostly doing a lot of reading, and then was paroled, and he went to Mexico, where he organized his invasion of the eastern part of Cuba.
Under much less duress, Bobby Maduro put the pieces together for his own incursion. Having a team was not enough to guarantee success and an invite into organized baseball. The franchise would have to be built to be sustainable at the big league level. Bobby Maduro wanted a major league franchise for Cuba, so he went about building a team and a brand that was big league.
Bobby Maduro's idea when he started to organize his famous Havana Sugar Kings was to start them from the bottom.
Maduro took steps to ensure that the Sugar Kings would not only be from Cuba, but of it, by investing in and developing an academy system unique in all of baseball at the time.
Los Cubanitos are the beginning of what we would call the minor leagues of the Sugar Kings, starting at the ages of 8 and 12.
You know, that player development was tremendously important for my father. And that's something I think would have been very unique. The leagues he was trying to form to feed the players into the Sugar Kings. And I think his vision at the beginning was to field a whole Cuban team.
It was very special because we used to play in no organized baseball. You know, we play in the street, we learned that way. But now, little kids, growing up, they have coaches and baseball people who tell them how to play the game and be disciplined. And they show you how to win ball games. And that was great.
He thought the game of baseball provided the youth tremendous opportunity to make a great living.
I told my parents I want to be a baseball player. They want me to go to high school and then to the university. But I say I want to play baseball. And they used to tell me, no, you're going to end up working on the factory. And I say, no, I want to be like Minnie Minoso and those guys.
It would be a few years before players from the Cubanitos would be ready to produce for the Sugar Kings. In the interim, Maduro cobbled together a team to appeal to Cubans, pairing aging Cuban stars like Connie Marrero, Pedro Formental, and Reno Blake with Cuban and Latin players to create a team that Cuban fans would call their own.
I was a devoted fan of the Cuban Sugar Kings. Sometimes people referred to the team as the Havana Sugar Kings, but it was not called that at all. It was called the Cuban Sugar Kings to capitalize on the whole island as a fan base.
It was a national team, no question about it. Fans from the 4 teams were really behind because this was a national team, a Cuban team.
In baseball-mad Cuba, the opponents of the hometown heroes were also part of the draw.
To me, it was a treat to be able to go to the stadium in Havana, where I was living, and seeing ball players I had read about because they had played in the major leagues or they were on their way to the major leagues. When the Richmond team came to town, I could see the future Yankees out in the field and older Yankees on their way down. Players that I had read about and whose baseball cards I had. So the team was a window to the major leagues for me.
But those visiting stars were a burden on the finances of the Sugar Kings. As a condition of granting Maduro and Cuba the franchise, the International League demanded that the visitor cut of gate receipts be guaranteed. So Maduro and the Sugar Kings had to pay out, even if a game or team didn't draw. The Sugar Kings had all the pieces in place: star appeal, national pride, development of indigenous talent. They even made the playoffs in their second season. But Maduro failed to account for what may have been his team's biggest opponent.
He was shrewd enough to bring back players from the Winter League who were known and so forth. And the team the first year did quite well. Then the team ran into the revolutionary movement in Cuba. That put a damper on the attendance at the stadium in Havana for the Sugar Kings and also for the Winter League.
As the revolution stretched on, losses on the field increased. The luster of being Cuba's team waned and attendance began to slip. The combination of struggles at the gate and guarantees owed visiting teams was bleeding Maduro dry. By 1958, the Sugar Kings were in trouble. They needed a savior. The Sugar Kings had finished dead last in 1958, their 5th season in the International League.
Those were really bad days in the history of the Sugar Kings, since at the economic level, well, there really weren't resources.
While attendance, but not support, wavered, it was getting more and more difficult to get the public's attention.
The revolution that began with Castro, a fugitive, practically alone, landing with 82 followers, to be nearly wiped out by government forces, ended with the flight of dictator Fulgencio Batista and the entry into Havana of rebel forces to be acclaimed by the city.
It was a frenzy of political news that kept one away from this team.
Havana's ovation for Fidel Castro himself had been long deferred. These scenes show his triumphal march across the island to the capital following the victory. In every town and hamlet, a cheering welcome greeted the rebel leader.
There was a parade when he came in. I was with my wife, and we went that evening just to watch the parade go by. But there was absolute feast and songs, and that environment lasted for weeks.
What role would you like to play in Cuba's future?
Well, in the future, I only have a duty here, is to serve my people in any position.
After the celebrations had subsided, Castro headed for the U.S. in April of '59. a tour de force during which he was embraced as a conquering hero. At the same time, Maduro's pleas for help were being met from baseball with suggestions he abandon Cuba. Maduro was loath to see his dream die, but he was running out of options.
At one time, my father announced that basically he could not continue with the losses of the baseball team, and Castro called him to New York and said, Bobby, whatever money you need, go back to Cuba and you'll get that money.
Maduro and the Sugar Kings also received an influx of talent. 11 past or future major leaguers were added to the roster. Workhorse pitchers Walt Craddock, Ted Weand, and Luis Arroyo joined Mike Cuellar and Raul Sanchez to give the Sugar Kings a solid staff.
I think there were 6 or 7 Americans. There was a couple of Puerto Ricans and a few Venezuelans.
Overshadowed since its inception by the established Cuban Winter League, the summertime resident of El Cerro now had a roster that caught the eye of the Cuban baseball fan.
I used to listen to the game with my father, the AAA with the Sugar Kings on radio, and then TV came up later on in the 50s, and I got to see, I told you, Leo Cardenas and Cookie Rojas and Borrego Alvarez, even a guy from another country like Elio Chacon from Venezuela.
Havana and the Sugar Kings also had something to offer players that was unique in all of baseball. Havana was a AAA city, but it had big league aspirations. And for players, it was not your typical minor league outpost.
They built a hotel and never finished it because of the Revolution. So we stayed in it. The only ones that were there were the ball players. Had guards 24 hours a day and a nice beach and stuff, and we got to enjoy it.
The life in Havana at night, it was just wonderful. The places that stay open way late. They're having parties all over the place. They're having singers and entertainment. We felt like we owned the world, to be honest with you.
We talked with the dealers all the time. We'd go in after a ball game, and we'd play a couple of games and, lose $5 or $10, then we could see the show. Nobody would say anything to us. We could watch the show.
For the American players, the culture shock extended to the playing field.
Well, they have a culture of their own in Cuba. We'd go to practice every day, and they weren't wearing a shirt or, they didn't have a hat or, it was fun, but it really wasn't the type of ball players that you would think would win.
When people from the outside come and see the excitement and the fun that they have, and they sometimes think back and say, wait a minute, here you guys are laughing, you guys are making jokes, but when it comes time to play between the lines, the thing changes right away, and I say, we're Tigers.
Cookie Rojas and Leo Cardenas brought plenty of spunk to the middle of the Sugar Kings' defense, but whether the two youngsters could actually play at the AAA level would have a big impact on the team's success.
The manager said to me, he said, we're going to have those 2 kids for the season. He said, we're going to have to put up with them. Oh, we didn't have to put up with them. They were great.
With a blend of energetic young players, a solid pitching rotation, and a hometown advantage unique in all of baseball, the Sugar Kings began to make Havana an uncomfortable place for opposing players.
Guys would come down there. They stayed in the hotels where the casinos were and everything, Wouldn't maybe take care of themselves while they were down there, overindulge a little bit, and they come out the next day, and they weren't too happy.
They got music, they got the charanga on top of the dugout, yelling and screaming and all that, and that brought certain atmosphere into the ball club. So when the team from the state came over to play us, they said, oh, we can beat this guy very easy, but when they got there and knew the way we were playing the game of the both, they had a little change of mind and said, wait a minute, this guy knows how to play the game of baseball.
They didn't like coming to Havana because we run them off the field. And our guys could run. We hit a ball and we could run,
As the '59 season progressed, the Sugar Kings began to gel. The winning and the calm that settled in with the close of the Revolution allowed fans to return, accompanied by their supreme commander.
He was just a hero at that time because he just turned over Batista, who was a dictator. So he came over to take advantage of that situation, to show everybody that he was supporting the ball club.
He was a good fan. He was a rabid fan. He knew baseball because he had played baseball.
He always throw the first pitch. He sometimes coming from the bullpen, sometimes coming from the server there. You never know. He is like a secret agency. You never know where you're coming from.
The first year of Raul Sanchez in the International League in '59, he was so caught up, like the entire Cuban nation was, that you know how he signed the ball? Raul Sanchez, long live Fidel, in the first year, but not after the second one.
The 1959 Sugar Kings looked like the team Bobby Maduro imagined when he dreamed them up. A core of young Latin talent with a scaffold of American-born Reds farmhands to show them the ropes of professional ball.
By the time we got to the 7th year, that was absolutely impressive. And the talent we had was already huge to get where Bobby had dreamed.
As Cuba's team, the Sugar Kings benefited from the rampant nationalism celebrated in post-revolutionary Havana.
The government began to make something of it because it was part of the anti-American propaganda, and this fed into it perfectly.
The embrace of the club went right to the top. Just months after ousting Fulgencio Batista, Fidel Castro was making his presence at the stadium at El Cerro nearly as common as an appearance on the steps of the Capitol.
He saw an opportunity. He also liked baseball very much. Fidel Castro's ego knows no bounds. I mean, you can get out there in the field, dress like a ball player, and be with the pros. I mean, what else could be better?
I'd like to say it did not affect the stadium. The only impact it had was that we had to separate an area for about 1,000 rebels who went to see the game.
It was part of what the revolution was about. That it was a thrill a day. That's what it was. And this became a part of it.
Never more so than on a Saturday night in late July. The weekend of July 25th and 26th was to be the first formal celebration of the revolution. Honoring the anniversary of his rebel forces' defeat at Moncada Barracks in 1953, Fidel Castro designated July 26th as Agrarian Reform Day, a national holiday, and called for newly liberated farm workers to join the celebration in Havana.
Showing another aspect of his character, the unpredictable Castro dons a baseball uniform to pitch a full inning in a benefit game for his agrarian land reform fund. Castro pitching is credited with striking out the 3 batters he faces. Could be.
A poster artist prepared the ticket, which was a tractor with small wheels circling around.
I was like 10 years old, you know, in that game, and it was tremendously exciting. A little bit scary, too. So many guns in the stadium. I think there were more guns than bats and balls in the stadium.
Well, it's all the people that came around with Castro all the way from the mountains into Cuba. Everybody had a gun or a rifle or whatever because they didn't know what was going to happen. You know, who's with Fidel Castro? Who's against Fidel Castro? Is there going to be another revolution? Is going to be a firing squad, you know, someplace? So everybody protected themselves at that time.
The celebration would coincide with a series between the Sugar Kings and the Rochester Red Wings, capping a home stand that saw the red-hot Sugar Kings climb to second place in the International League. First pitch at El Cerro was traditionally 9 p.m., and with the need to complete a suspended game before starting Saturday's scheduled game, plans were made to celebrate Agrarian Day at the stadium at the stroke of midnight.
That's a big celebration in Cuba, just like a Christmas coming, New Year.
Midnight struck with the Red Wings leading 4-3 as the scheduled game headed to the bottom of the 11th. The celebrations included fireworks and a singing of the national anthem. Then things took a turn. That the weekend-long celebration of Castro's revolution culminated with festivities that included the ascendant Sugar Kings was an honor for the team and players. But they had no idea what that would entail.
Well, we knew it was a national holiday, but we didn't know that they were going to be shooting guns, you know, and all of a sudden you heard this gunshots.
And there was a lot of shooting.
They were shooting in the air. You know, the militia.
I was in the bullpen, and in the bullpen, they had a Jeep that would take you from the bullpen to the mound, and we crawled under the Jeep. You could see the bullets coming down like rain on the infield. you'd see puffs.
And the umpire said, well, you have to get out of the field till they stop.
Tempted to call the game with Rochester ahead, the umpiring crew opted to continue, fearing the wrath of the hometown fans.
But that was all about. They tried to shoot people and all that. They just a celebration.
The Sugar Kings tied the game in the bottom of the 11th, and after the Red Wings' Dick Rand grounded out to Leo Cardenas to lead off the 12th, more shots rang out.
But one of those bullets hit the third base coach of the Rochester Ball Club.
Le cayó al casco.
A bullet fell smack in the middle of Frank Verdi. It fell right in the middle of his helmet. And if he didn't have that on, it would have killed him.
And I thought somebody hit me with a rock or something, you know what I mean? And I didn't pay attention to it. When I went to the dugout, I was training, he looked at my shirt, it was bleeding. I said, oh, I don't know.
When it all quieted down, we got out of there. We went into the clubhouse.
Then my trainer said, let's go in the clubhouse, change your shirt and see if you got more damage on it.
But we didn't know how bad they were hurt or anything until we got in there, and none of them were hurt bad.
So he said, okay, yeah, I don't know, right? No problem. I went and changed my shirt, put another shirt on it.
Despite the frantic efforts of government officials to keep the Red Wings in town to finish the series, Rochester left the island, forfeiting Sunday's scheduled series finale. The Sugar Kings left as well for a scheduled 2-week road trip. By the time they returned, the celebrations had subsided and focus turned to a run at a playoff berth.
It was like a dream, what it meant for that Cuban team to win that year, coming from the island and so playing against organizations that had tremendous franchises. Toronto, you know, the Dodgers with Montreal, the Yankees, Syracuse, and all of those teams, Richmond. I mean, it was really something to go ahead and beat those clubs.
The Sugar Kings clinched second place in the International League and a berth in the playoffs on the final weekend of the season. They swept the Pirates' AAA affiliate, the Columbus Jets, in 4 games and dispatched the Yankees farm club from Richmond in 6 to reach the Junior World Series, a 7-game series between the winners of the International League and the American Association to decide the champion of minor league baseball.
I think it was a very important point to be a Cuban in that time, especially for a ball club that no one gave it a chance to exist. No one ever gave it a chance to get into a AAA ball club. Maybe in the future be a major league franchise. So it was something that it was important to the 7 million people in Cuba.
Well, it was really a big event, the celebration of that series. It was as if it were the real baseball World Series.
Gene Mauch's Minneapolis Millers were defending champs and featured future Red Sox Pumpsy Green, Lou Clinton, and a Double-A call-up at second base by the name of Carl Yastrzemski.
We didn't have much information about him. You know, I knew one guy on the team, Billy Muffett. I played with him in Houston. He was the only guy I knew on the team.
The first impression Minneapolis made on many of the Sugar Kings had nothing to do with its talented roster.
First, it was cold, and we're not used to it. Our temperature 80 degrees.
It's not like today that even those dugouts have electric, you know, heaters and all that. So we had to start a fire, getting some matches and getting some whatever we could find to keep our hands warm all the time in the dugouts.
After a split of the first 2 games, and with temperatures in the 40s and attendance below 3,000, the series was moved to Havana.
They say that the series was moved from Minneapolis, all the games to Havana, because it was very cold in Minneapolis. It wasn't quite that. I mean, that was part of it. The truth is that the attendance in Minneapolis was minimal. There was no interest in Minneapolis in this game against the Sugar Kings. And so they decided for business reasons to bring it to Havana, and also this political background which made it natural. So they brought the series to Havana to capitalize on that. I mean, this is business.
The reason for the move hardly mattered to Cubans. A world champion would be crowned in Havana, and Cuba's team was in the running.
People went nuts. They went crazy. When the first game was played in Havana, they had to put ropes on the field all the way from the dugout behind home plate to left field because there wasn't enough seats. People were sitting on the grass.
The Sugar Kings won extra inning affairs in games 3 and 4 to put themselves on the cusp of a championship. But the Millers broke up Walt Craddock's bid for a no-hitter in the 6th inning of Game 5 and took that and Game 6 to draw even in the series. Once again, the dreams seemed to be slipping away. October 5th, 1959 was a rainy day in Havana, and Game 7 of the Junior World Series was postponed for a day. For Bobby Maduro's Sugar Kings, the hope was the delay could break the momentum that saw their 3-1 lead evaporate and deliver a championship that could leave them truly one step away from Maduro's goal. Fidel Castro had already made his step, realized his goal, having ascended to power 9 months earlier. For one night, the two men would unite in support of a common goal.
After the series was tied, he went to my father and he said, Bobby, we need a pinch hitter. We have to win, the game tomorrow. My father said, cool it. Let me handle this part.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he would come in the dugout. He didn't stay in the dugout, but he would come in the dugout. But every night we had guys, soldiers in the dugouts. At practice, they were there already. They'd set the machine gun over here and take somebody's glove and go out and shag some fly ball.
There is a complicity between sports and war, between sports and militarism. Sports are like mock wars, but here, militarism and sports have coalesced. The leader is in the dugout.
It's unlikely there's ever been a deciding game quite like Game 7 of the 1959 Junior World Series. For Fidel Castro, it was about validation of the revolutionary movement. For Cuban players and fans, it was the beginning of that one more step. But in the end, it all came down to baseball.
Well, the atmosphere in the stadium was unbelievable. I mean, everything was really exciting.
And that place was full because Castro was there. They were sitting, hanging on the rafters. It was crazy. I pitched the first 7 innings, and we were losing 2-0. And he brought Raul Sanchez in, and he just shut him down.
In the 8th, Dan Morejon followed an Elio Chacon single with a ground rule double. And with 2 outs, Larry Novak laced a single that tied the game. Raul Sanchez kept Minneapolis off the board in the top of the 9th, and then led off the bottom.
And here comes the pitcher to hit against Minnesota.
El noveno, Raúl Sánchez recibe la base por bolas.
And he walks. You walk the pitcher. And that's an opportunity for our ball club.
Cabalillo se sacrifica y Raúl gana la segunda base. El público.
Chacon flied out, and the Millers walked Tony Gonzalez, the Sugar Kings' best hitter, to bring Daniel Morejon to the plate with the championship-clinching run on second base and 2 outs.
People are starting to get up all over the state. I think they knew what was going to happen. Morejon comes up to hit, first pitch, base hit to center field. People are going bananas. Here comes the run around third base. And he head slides into home plate to win the Little World Series.
Everybody went crazy. We went to the mound and got Morejon. Well, we had to let him make it to first base first. And then after that, we went in and picked him up and all that. That was exciting, though. That was a exciting feeling. That was beautiful.
You couldn't even get out of the place. I got a ride down to my hotel with some soldiers. They'd come in the dugout and stuff, they knew who I was, and they took me down to my hotel. The people wouldn't let us go.
Just as Maduro and the Sugar Kings ascended to the top of minor league baseball, the support underneath their throne began to crumble. In the fall of 1959, the Cuban Sugar Kings were world champs, loved by a nation and its popular leader, but their footing on that pedestal quickly faltered.
There were league meetings, and at one league meeting, it was agreed with the Cubans' objection that the president of the International League had the power to move a team if it had to do it. That was the first clear sign of conflict.
On the field, the Sugar Kings tried to project an air of normalcy and took to the field as defending champs of minor league baseball. But when Fidel Castro nationalized 382 companies in a stunning power grab, it set off a remarkable turn of events that included a change in the face and course of baseball in Cuba and the United States.
Brian, Havana is Cuba, see? Yankees, no. The trucks belong to the American-owned Cuban Electric Company, recently nationalized by the government, along with the telephone company, also American-owned.
Baseball was a footnote. It was something marginal compared to what was going on in real politics.
The Sugar Kings played Rochester on June 27th and then boarded a plane for a road trip they thought would take them to Columbus, Richmond, and Miami. But on July 8th, having been granted the power to do so in February, International League Commissioner Frank Shaughnessy informed Bobby Maduro and Cincinnati Reds general manager Gabe Paul that he had decided to relocate the team and abandon Cuba.
We're doing this, taking this action today with a lot of regret. We've had some wonderful experiences in Cuba, especially last fall in the Junior World Series when for 5 straight days they turned out over 20,000 people at games, each of the games out there. They're the finest fans in the world in Cuba.
I arrived at the hotel, and I had a message from Gabe Paul saying that I should call him.
He calls me on my room and says, Cookie, I'd like to see you. I'd like to sit down with you and explain something that is going to happen. And I mean, what is happening? He says, well, we have to move the franchise from Havana to Jersey City, New Jersey.
The main thing that he said was, those who want to return to Cuba should say so after this meeting, when Ramiro is finished, so that Ramiro can make travel arrangements for you.
So it was just like a very silent room that night in that hotels.
I remember at the time being disappointed and a little angry at the leaders of the International League would do something like that. But I can see from their perspective now, it had to be done. I mean, having a team in Cuba meant that a number of players belonging to the Cincinnati Reds organization would have to live in Cuba, including American players who would be sent to AAA, as they are normally sent to AAA, or they move up to AAA, and they spend a year in Havana, living in the country. It was becoming increasingly difficult for that to happen.
The Cuban players on the team knew the life of a baseball player was an itinerant one. They knew the one more step they had been striving to take would be a big one. None of them expected it to mean exile. The relocation of the Sugar Kings from Havana to Jersey City had little impact on the American-born players, but it put the Cuban players in an impossible situation.
Tony Castaño, for example, the manager of the ball club of the era, he had a big business in Cuba, right behind the Stadium del Cerro. He had like a grocery store there, and his wife was there, and his daughter was there, so it was difficult for him to say, am I going to stay here and wait until I can get them out of Cuba? So he had to go back, as well as Raul Sanchez had to go back too.
The Cubans who elected to stay were subjected to pressure from home.
Those in charge of baseball would call the ball players and their families. Listen, you're leaving your wife here. You're leaving your children here. Remember, you won't see them again.
Well, it's difficult. It's like I said, I wanted to play baseball. If I go back to Cuba, that dream would have gone completely out of whack. That was my profession, and I wanted to stay here.
That was a rough time, though. That was kind of a rough time. But it still is my home. It's still my home. I never put my home down. Never. I don't care where I came from. I always loved my home. I still got sisters, brothers. My mama and my daddy died when I was here, but I still got sisters and brother home.
The road trip ended in Miami as planned, but the trip home took the team north to Jersey City, not to Havana.
We didn't have no choice. We had to keep playing. We still in the middle of the season.
They told us that we were going to be moving to the Jack Tartt Hotel in Jersey City. And the last floor of that hotel was really packed for all Cuban players. All the kids and wives that were on the trip and came over, that's where we stayed.
The Sugar Kings played the remainder of their home games in cavernous Roosevelt Stadium. Several years earlier, the Brooklyn Dodgers played exhibition games there as part of Walter O'Malley's play to get out of Brooklyn. But the crowds were disappointing. It was not a promising fit for a team built to be stars of Cuba, the Caribbean, and Latin America, even if they were world champions.
Boy vendió los
Bobby sold the players he could, traded the players he could, and they found work. And they adapted like all of us had to adapt.
When I was in New Jersey, he said, I got a message from up there, buddy. They want you up there tonight. I said, tonight? Yeah, look. That's why I said to my wife, I said, well, I got to go, girl. So I went and pack a little bit here, a little bit there, and go and get it.
Back in Cuba, the effect of Castro's move to nationalize businesses was reverberating in the national pastime.
Even baseball in Cuba, and once you couldn't find more avid fans anywhere, is dying. The Sugar Kings are gone. American players won't come, and even Castro's pleading for attendance has made little difference at the gate.
Even the Cuban Winter League felt the effects.
After that season, there was a season with only Cuban ball players. The signing of foreign players was forbidden, until finally he eliminated professional baseball completely.
And they told us we won't be no more professional baseball.
So we had a big meeting in the Tropical Park in Havana with Oreste Miñoso, Camilo Pascual, Raul Sanchez, everybody. And we understood then, hey, this is going to be the last Winter League that we're going to have in Cuba.
And I remember all the big guys, I call them big guys because all the guys from the big leagues were there, and I was there as a rookie. And I remember they say, we are leaving because they asking us to stay and help the revolution. And I guess a few guys stayed, but most of the guys, I think 99% of the guys left.
In this case, the decision to leave home and follow the dream didn't prove as romantic as the cliché.
We thought we were going back the next year, and we continue to think we're going back next year. But we've been trying to get back for 53 years. The same thing happened with baseball as with the rest of those exiled.
And one thing that I can remember, it was my sister, my older sister. She wrote me a letter when we was in the States. She said, well, you know, Pop gone. And before he left, before he passed away, he will pray to God give you the strength to see me and my brother.
Yeah, it was hard for me too, and everybody, because I left my family back, my mother, my father, and all my brothers and sisters. And I left Cuba, and I didn't came back there until my father got sick in 72, and then I went back. But that was the last night I see my father alive.
Gutted of its organizing principle to develop Cuban and Latin American talent and provide those players direct access to organized baseball, the Cuban Sugar Kings withered and died as the Jersey City Jerseys, taking with them the last chance at a marriage of the world's two biggest baseball cultures.
We did it as a group of guys playing baseball. It wasn't Cuban, it wasn't American, it wasn't Puerto Rican. It was a bunch of guys playing baseball.
It really upset us because we had the hope of that famous slogan, Un paso más y llegamos, that we were going to have the next expansion club. When Cuba lost the Sugar Kings, well, obviously the fans lost.
To have a big league in Havana, it would be wonderful, you know. But you know, everything changed.
In less than a year's time, Cuban baseball and Cuban baseball players went from being one step away to not even having a path. The story of Cuban baseball went from the possibility of a Yankees-Sugar Kings pennant race to stories of Orlando Hernandez surviving on a raft for 5 days and Yasiel Puig being held hostage by Mexican drug lords to gain access to their dreams.
We had to leave. We had to cut the story. We had to cut the book. No more international league. No more world championships. No more baseball.
Oh, it was very sad, pretty painful. The years have passed, and still one feels the pain of un paso más y llegamos.